And the conclusion was that I killed my daughter. You know, this is something we've been trying to get accomplished almost from day one. Get help from the outside. The circumstances were very similar. I believe that creature came into our home when we were gone. They had gone out, come back, set the burglar alarm, and gone to bed. So obviously he was in the house when they got home. And that's what I believe happened in our case.
Yeah, I mean, this is Boulder, Colorado, and, you know, the mid to late 90s. I mean, these two crimes are just complete and total outliers of what would have occurred in this city otherwise, right?
But totally similar.
Yeah, but totally similar.
And yet never investigated as connected.
No.
First of all, in his latest appearance, John Ramsey shattered one of his own biggest beliefs, his faith in DNA, when he revealed he neither understood nor even seemed to care about the results and advancements that already exist. In his most recent interview on News Nation with Ashley Banfield, as usual, prompted by a landmark ruling in the Long Island serial killer case allowing whole genome sequencing evidence, Ramsey once again spotlighted emerging DNA technologies. He described whole genome sequencing as a huge advance, explaining that it enables reconstruction of a full genetic profile from degraded or minimal samples, something impossible in earlier eras. Ramsey expressed firm conviction that it's the way our case will be solved, highlighting how this method has been used to identify 9/11 victims and could similarly apply to unresolved evidence in his daughter's death. During the discussion, for the main point, John pointed out that there are several hair samples from the crime scene that remain unidentified, asserting that recent findings show data can now be extracted from hair through whole genome sequencing.
I learned recently that yes, you can get this data from a hair sample. We have several hair samples from JonBenét's crime scene that weren't identified. We donated hair and pubic hair. There's a pubic hair sample.
He elaborated that these samples, previously deemed unusable due to degradation, could yield vital clues if processed with current tools, potentially building a family tree to narrow down suspects. He emphasized the need from traditional DNA matching, which relies on outdated federal databases with limited markers, to investigative genetic genealogy that uses vast amounts of genetic information to trace lineages. In the interview, he drew parallels to other cold cases solved this way, reinforcing his optimism that there's a really good chance it could be solved if it's implemented.
Then they went and got his DNA, and the DNA matched the sample they have. And so bingo, they found the killer. So it's a huge advance, and I believe it's the way our case will be solved. I think it's a really good chance it could be solved if it's implemented.
This conversation built on his prior statements, like those in a January 2025 CNN appearance after meeting with law enforcement, where he described feeling very satisfied and impressed with new leadership committed to advanced testing. Ramsey's push for whole genome sequencing isn't isolated. In a Fox Nation series released around the same time, he featured prominently, discussing how untested items from the scene, combined with these innovations, could finally provide closure. He has consistently framed these technologies as transformative, capable of overcoming the barriers that have kept the case open for nearly 3 decades. Ramsey's comments in the News Nation interview also delved into specific evidence, particularly a hair sample he referred to as. He asserted that this item, found on the white blanket wrapping the body, has never been fully exploited for DNA and could hold crucial information about the perpetrator. Ramsey suggested that if tested with modern methods, it might reveal a genetic profile pointing to an unknown male, aligning with his long-held intruder theory. He noted that while some DNA from the scene has been analyzed, this particular sample, along with others, remains an untapped resource, potentially containing touch DNA or other traces that whole genome sequencing could amplify. Yet, these statements raise questions about the depth of Ramsey's understanding or awareness of DNA evidence. Particularly regarding the hair sample, he continues to use the wrong name. Despite his proclaimed expertise and frequent references to cutting-edge forensics, Ramsey's characterization clashes with established findings from as early as 2005, when FBI mitochondrial DNA testing determined the hair was auxiliary hair, likely from an underarm, back, or chest area. This reclassification, detailed in James Kohler's 2012 book Foreign Faction based on investigative files, eliminated any sexual connotation and pointed instead to a female source, with Patsy Ramsey not excluded as the origin, possibly matching her or someone in her maternal lineage. The discrepancy is stark. Ramsey, as the father deeply involved in the case and surrounded by legal and investigative teams, should have access to these details, yet he persists in using the outdated hair label, which originated from initial visual assessments in 1997 but was debunked years ago. This persistence prompts skepticism. Does he genuinely lack knowledge of the FBI's conclusions, despite the passage of time and public disclosures? Or is he deliberately maintaining the wrong hair narrative to imply a male intruder and bolster his theory? This inconsistency extends to broader questions about Ramsey's grasp on forensic details, especially given his self-presentation as a DNA advocate. For example, while he champions whole genome sequencing as revolutionary for degraded samples, the auxiliary hair's prior analysis showed no unidentified stranger DNA, yet he discusses it as if untapped potential exists. This could indicate a gap in his comprehension, perhaps relying on outdated briefings from allies like Lou Smith, who retired before the full FBI results emerge, or a calculated choice to highlight ambiguity. In the context of his News Nation appearance, where he links the hair to the Gilgo Beach ruling's success with degraded DNA, the mismatch is particularly jarring. That case involved clear male hair profiles, whereas his reference sample aligns more closely with familial sources. Skeptics argue that if Ramsey truly understands the science he promotes, he would correct the record to avoid misleading implications. Yet his repeated use of the outdated hair label evokes a predatory male intruder, potentially influencing public opinion and pressure on investigators. This raises doubts about whether his enthusiasm for DNA is fully informed or serves to deflect from evidence that doesn't support his narrative. Furthermore, the timeline of disclosures, FBI testing between 1998 and 2005, public confirmation in 2012, means Ramsey has had over a decade to update his statements, making the ongoing error seem less like an oversight and more like a persistent tactic. In light of his meetings with Boulder Police in 2025, where he pushes for advanced testing, one wonders if he's prepared for results that might reaffirm the hair's not from private area, non-stranger origins, or if his advocacy assumes outcomes favoring his view. Such anomalies fuel ongoing debate about the authenticity of his forensic knowledge, suggesting that while he positions himself as a champion of science, key inaccuracies undermine that image. Adding to these inconsistencies, another layer of contradiction emerges when examining Ramsey's public insistence on comprehensive DNA testing against the historical actions of his legal team. In numerous interviews, including his recent appearance on News Nation and earlier ones with outlets like ABC News in 2025, Ramsey has vocally championed the idea that every piece of evidence should be re-examined using the latest DNA technologies. He portrays his family as eager collaborators in the pursuit of truth, emphasizing that untested or inadequately analyzed items could finally yield breakthroughs. For instance, he has repeatedly stated that the family wants all physical traces from the scene subjected to modern methods like whole genome sequencing, arguing that withholding such testing only prolongs injustice. This stance aligns with his broader narrative of being a victim of investigative shortcomings, where he claims law enforcement has been reluctant to embrace scientific advancements that could exonerate his family once and for all. Yet, this enthusiasm for exhaustive testing starkly contrasts with documented events from the late 1990s, when his lawyers actively opposed certain forensic procedures on key evidence. Adding to these inconsistencies, another layer of contradiction emerges when examining Ramsey's public insistence on comprehensive DNA testing against the historical actions of his legal team. In numerous interviews, including his recent appearance on News Nation and earlier ones with outlets like ABC News in 2025, Ramsey has vocally championed the idea that every piece of evidence should be re-examined using the latest DNA technologies. He portrays his family as eager collaborators in the pursuit of truth, emphasizing that untested or inadequately analyzed items could finally yield breakthroughs. For instance, he has repeatedly stated that the family wants all physical traces from the scene subjected to modern methods like whole genome sequencing, arguing that withholding such testing only prolongs injustice. This stance aligns with his broader narrative of being a victim of investigative shortcomings, where he claims law enforcement has been reluctant to embrace scientific advancements that could exonerate his family once and for all.
Patsy or me, that nothing else mattered. And then in January, they had sent some evidence in for DNA sampling, and the report came back middle of January. We've recovered unidentified male DNA from JonBenét's clothing. Does not match anyone in the family. Well, the police kept that a secret from the DA for 6 months because it conflicted with their conclusion.
Yet, this enthusiasm for exhaustive testing starkly contrasts with documented events from the late 1990s, when his lawyers actively opposed certain forensic procedures on key evidence. Specifically, during the early phases of the investigation, Ramsey's legal representatives objected to destructive DNA testing on the hair sample initially thought to be pubic. According to accounts in Lawrence Schiller's book Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, published in 1999, The attorneys argued that such testing, which would consume part of the sample, should only proceed once a suspect had been identified who matched other elements of the case. This position effectively delayed or potentially prevented full analysis at a time when the hair was considered a possible link to an external perpetrator. The objection stemmed from concerns over preserving the evidence for future comparisons, but it raises questions about selective advocacy. Why resist testing a sample that could potentially clear the family if, as Ramsey now asserts, DNA is the ultimate arbiter of innocence? This historical resistance undermines his current portrayal of unwavering commitment to DNA exploration, suggesting a pattern where the family supported testing only under conditions that minimized risk to their own narrative. This contradiction extends to how Ramsey frames the overall investigative timeline and the status of specific evidence, often presenting a version that glosses over resolved details in favor of ambiguity. In his NewsNation discussion with Ashley Banfield, he claimed there are several hair samples from the crime scene that weren't identified, positioning them as untapped opportunities for new technology to reveal an unknown intruder. He elaborated that these samples, including what he described as a pubic hair in the blanket, remain mysteries that whole genome sequencing could unravel, potentially building genetic profiles or family trees to identify suspects. This assertion echoes his statements in a 2024 Fox News interview, where he highlighted overlooked hairs as critical leads ignored by authorities. However, this portrayal lacks precision when juxtaposed with established forensic history. By 2005, FBI mitochondrial DNA testing had already analyzed the key hair sample, determining it was not pubic but auxiliary, likely from an underarm, back, or chest area, and of female origin. The results, as detailed in James Kohler's 2012 book Foreign Faction based on case files, explicitly did not exclude Patsy Ramsey as the source, potentially linking it to her or someone in her maternal lineage like her sister or daughter from a previous relationship. This finding effectively ruled out the hair as belonging to an unidentified stranger, shifting it from intruder evidence to something more mundane, like innocent transfer within the household. John's failure to incorporate this information into his public statements, despite the passage of over a decade since its disclosure, suggests either a deliberate oversight or a lack of engagement with unfavorable details. In a 2025 appearance on Denver's ABC affiliate, he again emphasized unidentified hairs without mentioning the FBI's conclusions, which have been widely discussed in books, documentaries, and online forums. This selective emphasis keeps the intruder hypothesis viable in the public eye, as describing the hair as pubic or unidentified evokes images of a male perpetrator, while the actual auxiliary classification points inward. Such inaccuracies erode the credibility of his proclaimed expertise on DNA matters, as someone truly invested in the science would likely address and reconcile these discrepancies rather than perpetuate outdated narratives. Furthermore, by framing the hairs as wholly unexamined, Ramsey implies investigative negligence where progress was actually made, potentially misleading audiences about the case's complexities. These patterns collectively paint a picture of Ramsey's relationship with DNA evidence as more rhetorical than substantive, calling into question of his proclaimed dedication. While he frequently invokes DNA as the key to solving everything, citing examples like the Golden State Killer resolution in his 2025 CNN interview, his handling of specifics reveals gaps that suggest selective interest. These appearances on platforms like Fox News and NewsNation, timed just days before major events, set the stage for amplifying his message through interconnected promotional efforts, with The Last Destination as the new Fox Nation documentary series. It's clear that as these interviews gained traction, they coincided with Ramsey's scheduled appearance at CrimeCon in Denver, a long PR event that draws true crime enthusiasts and media coverage. The convention, held in early September 2025, provided a live platform for Ramsey to echo the same themes from his TV spots, discussing the promise of whole genome sequencing and unidentified hair samples in front of an engaged audience. Skeptics have noted the suspicious timing Ramsey's sudden surge in media visibility, jumping on the Gilgo Beach ruling to advocate for similar testing, occurs right before CrimeCon, suggesting the interviews were a prelude to boosting attendance and buzz for his session. Interestingly, while NewsNation articles covering his Banfield appearance omitted any mention of CrimeCon, the overlap is hard to ignore. Ramsey's comments about an upcoming meeting with police could be framed as part of the convention's draw, blending real investigative updates with promotional flair. This setup allows him to present himself as a fighter for justice, using the event to network with supporters and potentially generate more media spin-offs. The parallel media campaign is evident in Ramsey's back-to-back appearances on Fox News and NewsNation, both hammering home the identical message about whole genome sequencing as a game-changer that could resolve everything by analyzing those lingering hair samples. This repetition isn't coincidental, it smacks of a coordinated effort involving Ramsey, the Fox series producers, and perhaps even CrimeCon organizers to saturate the airwaves just ahead of the Denver gathering. By consistently highlighting the technology's role in identifying perpetrators from degraded evidence, as seen in Gilgo Beach, Ramsey keeps the conversation locked on scientific hope rather than historical inconsistencies. The campaign's synergy amplifies his voice, turning what could be isolated interviews into a unified front that promotes the intruder theory while downplaying elements like the fiber evidence linking to Patsy's clothing, which could complicate that storyline. This strategic messaging ensures that audiences associate Ramsey with progress and innovation, rather than the stalled official probe. Ramsey's direct outreach to the Boulder DA further illustrates how he's leveraging these media moments for tangible gains. According to reports, in response to the Gilgo Beach developments highlighted in his interviews, he called the district attorney's office to request a meeting, framing it as a timely push for applying whole genome sequencing to unresolved samples. This move adds a layer of urgency and legitimacy to his appearances, transforming promotional interviews into catalysts for official action. By tying the request to the hot news of the New York ruling, Ramsey elevates his narrative, making it seem like a natural progression rather than a calculated step in a larger PR strategy that includes the Fox series and CrimeCon. The timing of all this raises eyebrows, as Ramsey's emphasis on DNA breakthroughs surfaces immediately after the Gilgo Beach decision, with CrimeCon kicking off the very next day in Denver. It's no accident that his media blitz aligns so perfectly. Even if outlets like NewsNation didn't explicitly link it to the convention, the proximity suggests a deliberate effort to use the breaking, forensic angle to heighten interest in his live session. This convergence maximizes exposure, allowing Ramsey to ride the wave of public curiosity generated by the interviews into the event, where he can expand on the intruder theory in person. Central to the Fox Nation series is its deep dive into Lou Smith's intruder theory, which it packages as the whole L. Smith intruder theory stuff, complete with dramatized elements of surveillance and DNA collection that portray Ramsey's allies as modern-day sleuths. This focus not only revives Smith's legacy, but also provides Ramsey a sympathetic backdrop, emphasizing how untested evidence like the Garrett or hairs could point outward, away from any internal dynamics. By integrating this into the broader media push, Ramsey reinforces a version of events that absolves his family, conveniently ignoring fibers that tied back to Patsy's outfit and might suggest otherwise. Amid this flurry of activity, the recent passing of Tom Haney Jr., the detective who conducted a probing interview with Patsy back in the day, adds an intriguing note. Haney, who died suddenly on August 19, 2025, while golfing, was one of the figures who once scrutinized the family's accounts closely. His departure, mentioned in passing within discussions of the case's history, subtly underscores a shifting landscape where voices skeptical of the intruder narrative fade, leaving more room for Ramsey to dominate the conversation through his media engagements. This timing, while coincidental, fits into the pattern of Ramsey capitalizing on current events to advance his perspective. The overall media maneuvering points toward a concerted effort to promote the new Fox series as a definitive exploration of the intruder angle, potentially paving the way for it to evolve into a full-fledged documentary or film that champions that theory. With scenes of active DNA hunting and unprecedented access, the series positions Ramsey as the hero in a quest for justice, using the interviews and CrimeCon as launchpads to build hype. By selectively highlighting supportive evidence and downplaying contradictions like the fiber matches to Patsy's blazer, this push ensures the narrative remains tilted in his favor, turning public sympathy into sustained interest. Ramsey's choice to repeatedly invoke the hair sample with the wrong label, despite its reification as auxiliary, further exemplifies how he's curating content for maximum impact, keeping the intruder imagery vivid in viewers' minds. This tactic, echoed in the Fox production, helps sustain the theory's appeal, even as it bypasses details that could undermine it, like the unmentioned objections to early testing. As the campaign unfolds, the integration of these elements, interviews seeding DNA optimism, the series dramatizing intruder pursuits, and CrimeCon providing a live forum, creates a self-reinforcing loop that benefits Ramsey's image. The absence of CrimeCon mentions in some coverage only heightens the intrigue, suggesting a subtle orchestration where the event's promotion rides implicitly on the media wave he's generated. This layered approach, from the DA to appearing on stage, demonstrates a savvy use of timing and platforms to keep the focus on external culprits, with the Fox series at the heart as a potential springboard for more expansive media projects centered on the intruder hypothesis. In some expectations, the new Fox Nation series, JonBenét, The Killer List, slated to delve into the ongoing investigation with what it touts as unprecedented access to John Ramsey's team, may mirror the heavily criticized bias seen in Netflix's Cold Case: Who Killed JonBenét Ramsey? Released on November 25, 2024. Directed by Joe Berlinger. The Netflix series promised a fresh look at the case but has drawn ire for its one-sided portrayal, heavily favoring John Ramsey's narrative of an external intruder while sidelining evidence that could complicate his family's innocence. Much like the Fox series appears poised to amplify Ramsey's advocacy for DNA testing and the intruder theory through dramatized surveillance and lab work, the Netflix documentary constructs a narrative that feels more like advocacy than objective analysis, prompting debates about its integrity and the selective lens it applies to a complex case. The Netflix series, spanning 3 parts, leans heavily on John Ramsey's perspective, presenting him as a grieving father unfairly targeted by a bungling police force and a sensationalist media. Berlinger, who admitted to shifting his stance after 2 years of research to believe the Ramseys are innocent, structures the documentary around this premise, emphasizing DNA evidence as the key to identifying an unknown perpetrator. Exclusive interviews with Ramsey dominate, where he recounts the trauma of being hounded by investigators and reporters, framing his family as victims of circumstance rather than potential suspects. The series devotes significant time to revisiting the intruder theory championed by retired detective Lou Smith, showcasing his work with Ramsey's team to pursue leads like unidentified hairs and touch DNA. It highlights the 2008 DNA exoneration of the family, based on male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing, as a cornerstone of their innocence, and pushes the potential of whole genome sequencing to crack the case, echoing Ramsey's recent media talking points. This focus creates a compelling story of a wronged family seeking justice, but it glosses over critical counterpoints, drawing accusations of bias from viewers and critics on platforms like IMDb and Reddit, who call it painfully biased for lacking a balanced exploration of evidence. One glaring aspect of the documentary's slant is its selective presentation of forensic details. It emphasizes untested or unidentified samples, such as hairs Ramsey claims remain mysteries, to bolster the idea of an elusive intruder. However, it sidesteps the fact that a key hair sample was identified by FBI mitochondrial testing between 1998 and 2005 as auxiliary hair. This finding, which undermines the intruder narrative by suggesting a household origin, is conspicuously absent from the series. Similarly, the documentary ignores fiber evidence from the duct tape used in the crime, which matched the red and black blazer Patsy wore that night, a detail that could imply her proximity to the scene. By focusing solely on DNA that supports an external perpetrator, such as the unknown male profile, and omitting these inconvenient facts, the series crafts a narrative that aligns with Ramsey's public stance but fails to engage with the case's complexity, fueling controversy over its one-sidedness. The Netflix production also dedicates a substantial portion to criticizing the Boulder Police Department's early mishandling of the investigation, a point few dispute, but it does so in a way that deflects scrutiny from the Ramseys' own actions. It highlights how the crime scene was contaminated by friends invited over after the 911 call and how initial police errors, like failing to secure the house, muddied the evidence trail. Yet, it barely touches on the Ramseys' decision to call those friends despite a ransom note warning against alerting anyone, or their immediate 911 call despite threats of JonBenét's death if police were involved. These behaviors, flagged by investigators like Linda Arndt as suspicious, are glossed over, with the series instead portraying the family as naive parents caught in a media storm. This selective framing amplifies the narrative of external incompetence while downplaying questions about the family's choices, prompting critics to argue that the documentary cherry-picks details to absolve the Ramseys rather than probe the full context. Another point of contention is the series' treatment of alternative suspects, which leans heavily into speculative territory without substantive evidence. It rolls out a parade of potential pedophiles like Gary Oliva, a known offender who confessed but whose DNA didn't match, and John Mark Carr, whose false confession wasted investigative resources. These segments consume significant runtime, reinforcing the intruder hypothesis by suggesting a shadowy external figure, yet they fail to connect these individuals to the crime with concrete proof. The documentary's choice to linger on such leads while ignoring more grounded suspicions, like the ransom note's origins on Patsy's notepad or its oddly specific 118,000 demand matching John's Christmas bonus, has sparked accusations of distraction. Reviewers on social media have called this a tactic to keep viewers focused on unlikely culprits rather than grappling with the note's personal tone or the family's lack of cooperation with police, such as their refusal to be interviewed without lawyers for months after the incident. The timing of the Netflix release, just months after Ramsey's high-profile appearances on Fox News and NewsNation discussing DNA breakthroughs tied to the Gilgo Beach case, adds to the perception of a coordinated media push. The Fox Nation series, with its focus on Ramsey's team actively collecting DNA and pursuing Smith's leads, seems set to continue this trend, potentially echoing the Netflix film's selective lens, Critics argue that both productions capitalize on Ramsey's ability to steer the narrative, emphasizing hope in new technology while sidestepping inconvenient truths, like the early objection by Ramsey's lawyers to destructive testing of the hair sample, or the lack of physical signs of forced entry, such as undisturbed cobwebs on the basement window. These omissions have sparked debates about whether such documentaries prioritize storytelling over truth, with Boulder police distancing themselves from the Netflix series Claims of New Leads, as reported by TMZ, suggesting it's more about rehashing Ramsey's perspective than advancing the investigation. The controversy surrounding the Netflix documentary lies in its failure to engage with the case's full scope, choosing instead to amplify Ramsey's version of events. By ignoring critical evidence like the fiber matches or the ransom note's peculiarities, and by sidelining expert voices that challenge the intruder theory, it presents a polished but incomplete picture. As the Fox Nation series looms, with its promise of behind-the-scenes access to Ramsey's efforts, there's a risk it will follow a similar path, prioritizing drama and sympathy over rigorous examination of all possibilities, much to the frustration of those seeking a balanced reckoning with the enduring mystery. In the end, the documentary's structure fuels these concerns, as it grants Ramsey significant airtime to recount his suffering and advocate for modern forensic methods, such as genetic genealogy, without facing scrutiny over inconsistencies in his account. Berlinger, in a November 2024 interview with Variety, admitted he sought Ramsey's involvement to help clear the family name, indicating an early alignment with Ramsey's goals. Ramsey's history of carefully managing his media presence bolsters the idea of a tailored agreement. Since the late 1990s, he has selectively engaged with outlets that allow him to control the narrative, as seen in his 2016 Dr. Phil appearance where he focused on DNA exoneration without addressing contradictory evidence. The Netflix series mirrors this pattern, presenting Ramsey as a proactive figure leading his own investigation, with scenes of his team collecting DNA from potential suspects, as highlighted in promotional materials claiming unprecedented access. This portrayal suggests Ramsey had influence over content, possibly negotiating terms to exclude theories of family involvement. For instance, the series avoids discussing the family's initial to cooperate with police, detailed in Schiller's book, where they delayed interviews and hired lawyers early on. By omitting this, the documentary aligns with Ramsey's claim of always supporting thorough investigations, implying a deal to sanitize past actions that could cast doubt on his advocacy. Financial and reputational motives add weight to the idea of a negotiated deal. Ramsey's participation in a high-profile Netflix project, reaching a global audience, would be appealing only if he could trust the portrayal. Berlinger's public shift from skepticism to endorsing Ramsey's innocence hints at discussions where Ramsey's cooperation depended on a sympathetic depiction. This could involve clauses limiting exploration of the ransom note's implications or the family's early legal maneuvers, which Schiller documented as obstructing police efforts. The series' failure to challenge Ramsey's claim of untested evidence, despite prior analyses ruling out certain leads, suggests he had leverage to shape the narrative. Viewer reactions on social media, describing the series as a Ramsey defense piece, reinforced the perception that producers agreed to prioritize his approved talking points, possibly to secure his exclusive interviews and access to his investigative efforts. The absence of rigorous questioning within the series further fuels speculation. Unlike balanced documentaries that grill key figures, this one allows Ramsey to dominate unchallenged, even when discussing DNA leads that have been partially debunked. Back to 2025, John Ramsey's active participation in these productions, coupled with his frequent appearances on platforms like NewsNation, ABC News, and CrimeCon events, suggests a deliberate strategy to shape public perception while tightly controlling the narrative. On the most charitable interpretation, this could be a protective measure to shield his family from further scrutiny, preserving their reputation after decades of suspicion. However, the sheer scale of these efforts, spanning high-profile series, coordinated interviews, and public appearances, raises questions about whether the primary goal is image management rather than truth-seeking. The absence of balanced perspectives, such as those from forensic pathologists or profilers who question the intruder theory, and the consistent deflection from evidence like the note's personal tone or familial DNA connections, as discussed in Steve Thomas' 2000 JonBenét Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation, fuels doubts about Ramsey's commitment to uncovering the full truth. Critics on platforms like Reddit and IMDb describe these films as propaganda pieces, noting their failure to probe family-related theories, suggesting Ramsey's media strategy prioritizes exoneration over resolution. While protecting one's family is understandable, the relentless focus on a singular narrative, coupled with the omission of challenging facts, prompts speculation about whether Ramsey and his family have sidelined the pursuit of justice in favor of controlling the story, leaving audiences to wonder if these efforts obscure more than they reveal. One thing worth noting is that nearly every move John Ramsey made seemed driven by a single purpose: to make himself look busy, not to uncover the truth. And the first clue lies in the so-called credible people he chose to hire for his own investigation. Let's go first with polygraph expert Edward I. Gelb and various handwriting analysts, as well as the refusal of reputable professionals like McCrary to work with him and the controversial involvement of Jim Clement. These choices raise questions about whether Ramsey prioritized hiring individuals who would deliver favorable outcomes over those unimpeachable credentials, casting doubt on his commitment to uncovering the truth. The experts he selected, often paid directly by the Ramsey family, have faced criticism for potential bias, questionable qualifications, or involvement in fields lacking scientific rigor, while those who declined to work with him or later opposed his narrative highlight a stark contrast in objectivity. Edward I. Gelb, a prominent figure in the polygraph community, was hired by the Ramseys in 2000 to conduct lie detector tests after an initial test by Jerry Lowe yielded inconclusive results. Gelb, a former Los Angeles police officer and past president of the American Polygraph Association, claimed to have conducted tens of thousands of polygraph exams for corporations, defense attorneys, and media outlets, frequently appearing on shows like CNN and Larry King Live as a go-to commentator. His tests concluded that both John and Patsy Ramsey were truthful when denying involvement in their daughter's death or writing the ransom note, with results verified by Cleve Baxter, a respected figure credited with founding the CIA's polygraph unit. However, Boulder police dismissed these findings, arguing that Gelb's employment by the Ramseys compromised his independence, and only an FBI-administered test would hold investigative weight. More damaging to Gelb's credibility was the revelation that his self-proclaimed Ph.D. came from LaSalle University in Louisiana, a notorious diploma mill shut down by the FBI for academic fraud. No record of Gelb's dissertations in national databases, earning him the derisive nickname Dr. Bogus among critics online and in investigative journalism circles. This controversy undermines the reliability of his polygraph results, as his credentials were inflated, suggesting Ramsey may have willingness to deliver favorable outcomes rather than for unimpeachable expertise. Had Ramsey been solely focused on truth, selecting a polygrapher with undisputed qualifications and no financial ties to the family might have lent greater legitimacy to the process. The Ramsey family's hiring of handwriting analysts in 1996 and 1997 to refute claims that Patsy wrote the ransom note further illustrates concerns about the credibility of their chosen experts. These analysts, paid directly by the Ramseys, concluded that Patsy's handwriting did not match the notes, directly contradicting FBI-hired experts, who could not rule her out as the author. The field of handwriting analysis itself was contentious at the time, lacking standardized scientific methods, which amplified skepticism about the Ramsey-hired analysts' findings. Critics argued that their conclusions were tainted by financial incentives, as their employment by the family created a conflict of interest. In contrast, the FBI's analysts, operating independently, offered a more cautious assessment, highlighting the possibility of Patsy's involvement. This discrepancy underscores a pattern in Ramsey's approach, selecting experts whose findings aligned with his defense rather than those whose independence and rigor might withstand scrutiny. The reliance on a field already criticized for subjectivity further suggests that Ramsey prioritized results over credibility, as more reputable forensic disciplines, such as DNA analysis conducted by neutral parties, could have provided stronger evidence to support his claims. The refusal of Greg McCrary, a former FBI behavioral analyst, to join Ramsey's team adds another layer to the credibility concerns surrounding his expert selections. McCrary, approached to assist the Ramsey investigation, declined after reviewing the evidence and concluding that it pointed toward family involvement. He publicly criticized the 9/11 call and the ransom note as suggestive of staging, views that aligned with some law enforcement perspectives, but clashed with Ramsey's intruder narrative. McCrary's decision to walk away, detailed in his statements to media outlets like the Denver Post in the late 1990s, reflects his commitment to objectivity as he prioritized evidence over financial or reputational gain. His refusal stands in stark contrast to the experts Ramsey did hire, whose willingness to work for the family often coincided with conclusions favorable to them. McCrary's skepticism, grounded in his extensive FBI experience, highlights the divide between independent professionals and those Ramsey enlisted, suggesting that his choice of less critical experts may have been strategic to avoid challenging his narrative. A genuine pursuit of truth would likely have involved engaging figures like McCrary, whose reputation for impartiality could have bolstered the investigation's credibility, rather than dismissing those who questioned the family's account. Jim Clement, another former FBI behavioral analyst, presents a more complex case as his involvement in Ramsey-related media projects, such as the 2016 CBS documentary, The Case of JonBenét Ramsey, drew both attention and criticism. Clemente, who transitioned into a media figure after retiring from the FBI, initially supported the intruder theory in various true crime shows, aligning with Ramsey's narrative. His participation in projects like those at CrimeCon, where he discussed high-profile cases, and his role as a consultant for shows like Criminal Minds gave him a platform to shape public perception. However, a Rolling Stone article critiqued Clement for sensationalizing cases including JonBenét's by endorsing theories without sufficient evidence, particularly those favoring Ramsey's perspective. The CBS documentary, in which Clement was a key figure, suggested family involvement, specifically implicating Burke Ramsey, leading to a $750 million lawsuit from the Ramseys against CBS. Clement later revealed at CrimeCon 2024 that he personally faced a $90 million lawsuit from Ramsey for posing challenging questions, after which he was restricted from discussing the case further. This legal backlash suggests Ramsey's sensitivity to scrutiny and raises questions about why he collaborated with Clemente in media projects, only when they supported his narrative. Clemente's shift from endorsing Ramsey's stance to facing legal consequences for questioning it underscores the tension between Ramsey's preferred experts and those who later diverged, indicating that Ramsey may have sought professionals amenable to his agenda, rather than those committed to impartial analysis. The pattern of hiring experts like Gelb and the handwriting analysts, while avoiding or clashing with figures like McCrary and Clement when their views turned critical, points to a deliberate strategy to control the narrative. Gelb's questionable academic credentials and the handwriting analysts' financial ties to the Ramseys undermine their findings, as their lack of independence contrasts with the rigorous standards of FBI experts or figures like McCrary, who prioritized evidence over allegiance. Clemente's case is particularly telling. His initial alignment with Ramsey's narrative in media appearances made him a valuable ally, but his involvement in the CBS documentary, which challenged the family, led to swift legal action, suggesting Ramsey's intolerance for dissent even from those he once endorsed. The Boulder Police's rejection of Gelb's polygraph results, as reported by the Los Angeles Times in 2000, and their insistence on FBI-administered tests reflect a broader skepticism about Ramsey's chosen experts, whose credibility was often by their direct employment or the pseudoscientific nature of their fields. Had Ramsey been fully committed to transparency, he might have sought out professionals with unassailable reputations, such as FBI polygraphers or independent forensic analysts, rather than those whose credentials or objectivity were open to question. The contrast between Ramsey's hired experts and those who refused or later opposed him highlights a troubling prioritization of narrative control over truth-seeking. McCrary's refusal to join the team, based on his evidence-based concerns, and Clemente's legal troubles after questioning Ramsey, suggest that Ramsey favored experts who would reinforce his claims over those who might uncover uncomfortable truths. The reliance on figures like Gelb, whose Ph.D. was exposed as fraudulent, and handwriting analysts working in a field lacking scientific consensus, indicates a willingness to sacrifice credibility for favorable outcomes. These choices, coupled with Ramsey's legal actions against media projects that deviated from his narrative, as seen in the CBS lawsuit, raised doubts about whether his expert selections were driven by a desire to protect his family's image rather than to resolve the case. The absence of engagement with truly independent professionals, who might have challenged the intruder theory or scrutinized the ransom note more rigorously, underscores a pattern that prioritizes defense over discovery, leaving lingering questions about the motives behind Ramsey's expert selections. Moreover, John Ramsey and his wife Patsy's legal maneuvers and lack of cooperation with the Boulder Police, following the tragic events of December 1996, have long been a focal point of criticism, casting doubt on their commitment to aiding the investigation. Immediately after the discovery of their daughter's body, the Ramseys declined to participate in unconditional, formal interviews with the Boulder Police, demanding to review questions in advance and insisting on the presence of their attorneys. This stance delayed their first official interviews until April 1997, over 4 months later, a period when fresh memories could have been critical. Boulder Police viewed this as obstructive, arguing it hindered timely information gathering and fueled suspicions that the family was concealing something. The delay set a tone of resistance, as investigators believed prompt cooperation could have clarified key details, potentially narrowing the focus on suspects. Compounding this perception, the Ramseys swiftly assembled a robust legal and investigative team, hiring lawyers, private investigators like Smith, and a public relations firm within days of December 26, 1996. This team worked to steer the narrative toward an intruder theory, producing alternative leads that deflected scrutiny from the family. Police and public critics, as noted in Steve Thomas' 2000 book JonBenét, Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation, saw this as an attempt to control the case's direction rather than fully cooperate with law enforcement. The private investigators focus on external suspects, often without substantial evidence, contrasted with the police's broader approach, which included the family as potential persons of interest. This strategic hiring suggested to investigators that the Ramseys prioritized shaping public perception over assisting the official probe, as their team's efforts often seemed geared toward rebutting accusations rather than uncovering new facts. The contamination of the crime scene further exacerbated tensions. On December 26, 1996, John Ramsey moved his daughter's body from the basement to the living room after discovering it, violating fundamental protocols for preserving a crime scene. Additionally, the Ramseys invited friends and a pastor to their home shortly after calling 911, leading to significant disruption of potential evidence like fingerprints, footprints, or trace fibers. Boulder police, as documented in Lawrence Schiller's 1999 book Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, criticized this as a critical error that compromised the investigation, with some investigators suspecting it was a deliberate act to obscure evidence. The presence of multiple people in the house made it nearly impossible to isolate original forensic markers, hindering the ability to identify a perpetrator and reinforcing perceptions of the Ramseys' disregard for investigative integrity. Another point of contention was the Ramseys' failure to promptly provide clothing worn on the night of the incident, despite police requests to compare fibers found on the body with their garments. As Schiller's book details, the family delayed or incompletely complied, raising suspicions they were avoiding scrutiny of physical evidence. This was particularly significant given the discovery of red and black fibers on the duct tape, which matched Patsy's blazer, a detail that had been pivotal in confirming or ruling out suspects. The reluctance to provide these items frustrated investigators, who saw it as a missed opportunity to clarify the family's role, further deepening distrust and suggesting an intent to limit forensic analysis that might implicate them. Similarly, the Ramseys hesitated to provide DNA samples and fingerprints for comparison with crime scene evidence, only complying after notable delays. This reluctance, reported by the Denver Post in 1997, slowed the investigation at a critical early stage as timely submission could have expedited the elimination or confirmation of suspects. Boulder police interpreted this as another sign of non-cooperation, believing it reflected a strategic effort to control the scope of forensic inquiry. The delays, combined with the family's legal fortifications, created an impression that they were more focused on self-protection than facilitating a thorough investigation, a sentiment echoed by investigators in Thomas' book who felt stymied by the family's actions. The Ramseys' use of media to shape public opinion added another layer of complexity. By 1997, they engaged a PR firm and appeared on outlets like CNN to promote the intruder theory and criticize Boulder police for alleged incompetence. Their 2000 book, The Death of Innocence, furthered this narrative, portraying them as victims of a botched investigation. Police argued, as noted in Schiller's account, that these media efforts diverted attention from potential suspects, including the family, and created public pressure that complicated the case. The strategic use of media suggested a calculated move to sway opinion rather than assist law enforcement, reinforcing perceptions of obstruction. The 2000 polygraph controversy further highlighted Ramsey's legal tactics. After an initial test by Jerry Torriello in April 2000 yielded inconclusive results, the Ramseys, through their attorney Linwood, hired Edward Gelb, a former American Polygraph Association president, who concluded both John and Patsy were truthful in denying involvement. Cleve Baxter, a pioneer in polygraph techniques, validated Gelb's findings, but Boulder police dismissed them, insisting only an FBI-administered test would be credible due to Gelb's employment by the family. The Ramseys rejected an FBI test, citing bias, and instead publicized their private results through a May 2000 press conference, as reported by ABC's 20p20. Discussions on forums like WebSlits questioned whether the Ramseys underwent urine tests to rule out drugs that could skew results, though Gelb denied such tests were necessary for his method. This public relations stunt, emphasizing favorable polygraph outcomes while rejecting official testing, appeared performative to investigators, who argued it did little to advance the case and instead muddied the waters. In 2001, the polygraph issue resurfaced amid media debates, with the Ramseys claiming on shows like Larry King Live and The Today Show that police never formally requested tests, a claim Boulder authorities disputed. Their insistence on private experts over FBI involvement, coupled with Wood's dismissal of rumors about drug testing refusals, suggested a preference for controlled outcomes over transparent cooperation. These legal maneuvers, delaying interviews, contaminating the scene, withholding evidence, and leveraging media, created a pattern that investigators and critics viewed as obstructive. designed to protect the family rather than uncover the truth. The choice to publicize private polygraphs while rejecting official ones, as reported by the Los Angeles Times in 2000, reinforced the perception that Ramsey's actions were more about crafting a narrative than resolving the case, casting a shadow over his stated desire for justice. Back to the main question, that is, what is the purpose of John Ramsey to keep this case going like we see until now? John Ramsey's persistent public advocacy for resolving the case through advanced DNA testing, as seen in his frequent media appearances and involvement in documentaries, raises questions about whether he genuinely seeks to close the investigation or if his actions are driven by other motives, such as financial gain. Over the past 28 years, Ramsey has positioned himself as a tireless advocate for justice, emphasizing the potential of technologies like whole genome sequencing to identify an unknown intruder, as highlighted in his 2024 News interview and the Netflix series Cold Case: Who Killed JonBenét Ramsey, released on November 25, 2024. Yet, the selective nature of his engagement with evidence and the financial benefits derived from his media ventures cast doubt on his stated intentions. Critics argue that his focus on specific forensic leads, while ignoring others that could complicate his narrative, suggests a desire to control rather than conclude the investigation, potentially to sustain a lucrative public presence that has persisted since 1996. Ramsey's public statements often center on the need to retest evidence, such as the garrote or unidentified DNA samples, to finally pinpoint a perpetrator, a theme prominent in the Fox Nation series JonBenét, The Killer List, and his 2024 Doe Show appearance. He has consistently called for genetic genealogy, citing cases like the Gilgo Beach murders as proof of its efficacy, framing himself as a grieving father pushing for resolution. However, his selective emphasis on DNA evidence, while dismissing or downplaying resolved findings like the FBI's 2005 mitochondrial DNA analysis that linked certain samples to familial sources, as documented in James Kohler's 2012 book Foreign Faction, raises suspicions. This cherry-picking suggests he may prefer to keep the cairns that align with the intruder theory, avoiding scrutiny of evidence like the red and black fibers matching Patsy Ramsey's blazer. By focusing on untested or ambiguous leads, Ramsey maintains a narrative that keeps the investigation in limbo, potentially delaying closure to await uncomfortable revelations. His meetings with the Boulder District Attorney, publicized in a 2024 People magazine article, appear to push for new testing, but sidestep discussion of prior results that don't support his stance, hinting that his advocacy may be more about appearances than achieving a definitive resolution. The financial incentives tied to Ramsey's media engagements further complicate the perception of his motives. The publication of The Death of Innocence in 2000, co-authored with Patsy, was a significant financial endeavor, generating revenue through book sales while reinforcing their innocence. The book's narrative, which criticized police and media while promoting an external culprit, aligned with Ramsey's broader media strategy, seen in appearances on CNN in 1997 and Dr. Phil in 2016. These platforms likely provided direct or indirect compensation, whether through appearance fees or increased book sales, as speculated in discussions on Reddit. The Netflix documentary, directed by Joe Berlinger, and the Fox Nation series, both featuring Ramsey prominently, represent high-profile projects that likely involved financial arrangements, though exact figures remain undisclosed. The Netflix series, described by IMDb reviewers as a Ramsey defense piece, grants him extensive airtime to recount his perspective, suggesting he may have negotiated favorable terms to participate, possibly including payment for exclusive access. Similarly, his CrimeCon appearances, such as the 2024 event in Denver, are believed to yield speaking fees or boost related media ventures, as noted in online true crime forums. These financial benefits raise questions about whether Ramsey's advocacy is partly driven by the profitability of maintaining a public profile tied to an unresolved case. Ramsey's legal actions against media outlets further underscore the potential financial motives behind his efforts. In 2016, he and his son Burke filed a $750 million lawsuit against CBS for a documentary suggesting Burke's involvement, resulting in a settlement that, while confidential, likely provided substantial financial compensation, as reported by Rolling Stone. Similar lawsuits against outlets like Star Magazine and others in the early 2000s, documented in news archives, indicate a pattern of leveraging legal battles to both protect the family's image and secure monetary payouts. These settlements suggest that Ramsey has profited from defending his narrative, potentially incentivizing him to keep the case in the public eye through documentaries and interviews that reinforce his innocence while generating revenue. The Netflix series, with its focus on sympathetic portrayals and omission of evidence like the ransom note's origins on Patsy's pad, aligns with this strategy, as it avoids challenging Ramsey's account in ways that could jeopardize his legal or financial leverage. Critics on social media platforms like X argue that this selective storytelling, coupled with high-profile media deals, points to a motive of sustaining the case's profitability rather than pushing for its closure. The interplay between Ramsey's advocacy and financial gains creates a complex picture. His calls for DNA retesting, as seen in the 2020 Fox Nation series where his team is shown collecting samples, project an image of dedication to solving the case. Yet, the consistent avoidance of evidence that contradicts the intruder theory, such as the FBI's findings on familial DNA, suggests he may be more interested in perpetuating a narrative that keeps the investigation open-ended. This approach not only maintains public sympathy, but also sustains opportunities for financial gain through media projects. The Netflix documentary's emphasis on Ramsey's suffering and his team's proactive efforts, without probing inconvenient facts like the fibers or the note's personal tone, implies a curated production that benefits him and potentially financially. Berlinger's admission in a 2024 Variety interview that he aimed to clear the family name suggests Ramsey's participation was contingent on favorable framing, which could include compensation for his involvement or access to his investigative team. The financial dimension is further highlighted by Ramsey's long history of media engagement, from early appearances on Larry King Live to recent ones on News Nation, each reinforcing his narrative while likely generating income or boosting related ventures like his book. The Fox Nation series, with its dramatized scenes of DNA collection, aligns with this pattern, presenting Ramsey as a leader in the quest for justice while potentially profiting from the exposure. Online discussions, such as those on WebSleuths, speculate that Ramsey's media strategy is designed to keep the case unresolved, as a closed investigation, especially one implicating the family, could end his ability to monetize the narrative through lawsuits, books, or documentaries. The 2016 CBS settlement, for instance, not only provided financial relief, but also discouraged other outlets from pursuing family-related theories, ensuring Ramsey's narrative resonates and remains lucrative. Ramsey's selective focus on DNA also serves to prolong the case's public relevance, which in turn supports his financial interests. By repeatedly highlighting untested evidence in interviews and documentaries, he keeps the case alive in the media, creating opportunities for new projects like the Netflix series, which capitalize on public fascination. The absence of discussion about resolved evidence, such as the 2005 FBI analysis, in these productions suggests a deliberate choice to maintain ambiguity, which sustains both public interest and financial opportunities. Critics argue that a genuine desire to close the case would involve engaging with all evidence, including that which challenges his narrative, rather than selectively promoting leads that keep the investigation open and profitable. The financial success of The Death of Innocence and subsequent media ventures indicates that Ramsey has benefited from the case's unresolved status, raising doubts about whether his advocacy is driven by a desire for resolution or by the financial rewards of perpetuating the mystery. The cumulative effect of Ramsey's media engagements and legal victories suggests a dual motive, maintaining the appearance of seeking justice while capitalizing on the case's notoriety. The Netflix and Fox Nation series, by focusing on Ramsey's perspective and omitting critical evidence, align with this strategy, potentially generating revenue through his participation or related publicity. His consistent narrative across these platforms, emphasizing DNA while ignoring fibers or the ransom notes implications, keeps the case in a state of perpetual investigation, which benefits financially through ongoing media opportunities and legal settlements. While Ramsey's public statements project a commitment to resolution, the financial incentives tied to his media presence and legal actions raise significant questions about whether his true aim is to close the case or to sustain a narrative that continues to yield profit, leaving the investigation in a carefully managed limbo. Speculation about John Ramsey's motives beyond resolving the case or seeking financial gain centers on protecting his family's reputation and potentially concealing involvement in the events surrounding his daughter's death. By steadfastly promoting the intruder theory, Ramsey has maintained a public image as a grieving, wrongfully accused father, which shields his late wife Patsy and son Burke from lingering suspicion. The emotional appeal of a father fighting for his daughter's justice resonates with audiences, as seen in positive reactions on platforms like Reddit, where some users express empathy for Ramsey's plight. However, this focus comes at a cost. It limits the scope of the investigation by diverting attention from alternative theories, potentially delaying or preventing closure. The insistence on an external perpetrator, despite evidence like the ransom note's origin on Patsy's pad, risks perpetuating skepticism among investigators and the public. This skepticism could tarnish Ramsey's credibility, portraying him as evasive and undermining his claims of innocence. Additionally, maintaining this narrative requires constant vigilance, draining emotional and financial resources, as Ramsey must continually counter critics and manage public perception, a burden that may outweigh the reputational gains if the truth ever points inward. Another potential motive is Ramsey's desire to avoid personal accountability, which offers the benefit of shielding himself from legal or moral responsibility. By focusing on DNA evidence and an unknown intruder, Ramsey distances himself from scrutiny over familial involvement, such as the fibers matching Patsy's blazer or his own actions at the crime scene. This strategy has allowed him to maintain a semblance of normalcy, continuing his professional and personal life without formal charges. However, the loss is significant. The refusal to engage with conflicting evidence fuels accusations of deception. This persistent cloud of suspicion isolates Ramsey from full public trust and risks long-term reputational damage, especially if future evidence contradicts his narrative. The emotional toll of living under this scrutiny, coupled with the need to defend his story, represents a substantial personal cost, potentially outweighing the temporary protection gained by avoiding accountability. Overall, over the past 28 years, Ramsey has maintained several key deceptions to support his narrative, primarily through selective omissions and misrepresentations. He has consistently claimed that all significant evidence remains untested, ignoring findings like the FBI's 2005 mitochondrial DNA analysis that linked certain samples to familial sources, as documented in Kohler's book. This omission, repeated in interviews, allows Ramsey to perpetuate the intruder theory while sidestepping inconvenient truths. For example, he has described the ransom note as the work of an outsider, despite its personal tone and origin on Patsy's pad, which FBI analysts in 1997 could not rule out as her writing, per Schiller's account. This selective narrative constitutes a lie of omission, as Ramsey avoids addressing evidence that could implicate his family. Additionally, he has misrepresented his cooperation with authorities, claiming full transparency in media appearances, while records from Thomas' book show delays in providing DNA, fingerprints, and clothing samples. These misrepresentations, often framed as part of his victimhood narrative, have been consistent since 1996, evolving from early TV appearances to later platforms where he emphasizes DNA breakthroughs. The style of Ramsey's deceptions blends emotional appeals with strategic vagueness. He frequently uses sympathetic language, portraying himself as a grieving father, which deflects scrutiny and garners support, as seen in viewer reactions on WebSleuth's forums. His vague references to untested evidence or police incompetence allow him to avoid specifics that could be challenged, maintaining flexibility in his narrative. This pattern of half-truths and selective focus has persisted, adapting to new forensic developments, while never acknowledging contradictory findings. The lies are likely to continue until a definitive resolution, such as conclusive DNA evidence identifying a perpetrator, forces Ramsey to confront or abandon his narrative. Without such a breakthrough, the open-ended nature of the case allows him to sustain these deceptions, as public interest and lack of closure provide ongoing opportunities to reinforce his story. The benefits of Ramsey's motives, reputational protection and avoiding accountability, are tempered by significant losses. The public sympathy he gains is fragile, undermined by persistent doubts from investigators and online communities, who point to discrepancies like his casual behavior during the ransom call deadline, as noted by Detective Linda Arndt in her 1997 reports. The cost of maintaining these deceptions includes ongoing public and personal pressure, as Ramsey must continually address accusations while facing the possibility that new evidence could unravel his narrative. His lies, rooted in omission and strategic framing, have allowed him to control the story, but at the expense of credibility, as critics like those on Reddit question his sincerity. The interplay of these motives and deceptions suggests Ramsey may prioritize self-preservation over a resolution that risks exposing uncomfortable truths, with the balance of benefits and losses hanging on whether the case ever reaches a definitive end. The enduring saga of this high-profile case offers profound lessons about the tension between personal motives and the pursuit of truth, particularly when a family seeks to protect its reputation in the face of tragedy. It is entirely natural for a grieving parent to want to shield their loved ones from public scrutiny, to preserve their dignity, and to safeguard surviving family members from a lifetime of stigma. This instinct to defend one's family image is a human response, rooted in the desire to maintain a sense of normalcy and honor amidst overwhelming loss. However, the actions taken to achieve this protection can paradoxically undermine those intentions, creating a web of controversy that obscures the path to justice. In this case, efforts to control the narrative through selective engagement with evidence, media campaigns, and legal maneuvers have fueled skepticism and debate, casting a shadow over the family's stated commitment to resolving the tragedy. These actions, while perhaps intended to deflect blame and preserve reputation, have instead amplified public and investigative doubts, suggesting that the pursuit of image protection may have taken precedence over uncovering the truth. The resulting controversies have not only prolonged the case's unresolved status, but also hindered the quest to identify the perpetrator, leaving the victim's memory caught in a cycle of speculation. This case stands as a landmark in American legal and investigative history, fundamentally altering how high-profile investigations are conducted and how public perception influences justice. It exposed flaws in early forensic handling, media dynamics, and the interaction between private defenses and public investigations, prompting reforms in evidence preservation, interagency cooperation, and the scrutiny of familial involvement in criminal cases. The unprecedented media frenzy surrounding the tried the power of public narratives to shape investigations, often at the expense of objectivity, leading to stricter protocols for managing crime scenes and media interactions. Yet, the case also serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of prioritizing reputation over transparency. When actions intended to protect a family's image, such as curating evidence or deflecting scrutiny, generate more questions than answers, they risk derailing the very justice they claim to seek. This paradox leaves observers questioning whether the truth was ever the primary goal or if it was overshadowed by the need to control the story. For audiences reflecting on this case, the lingering question is whether justice for the victim can still be achieved. The passage of time, combined with the complexities introduced by conflicting narratives, challenges the hope for closure. Yet, the enduring public interest and advancements in forensic technology offer a glimmer of possibility that answers may yet emerge. The case compels viewers to grapple with their own assumptions. Can a family's desire to protect its legacy coexist with an unfiltered pursuit of truth? Or do such efforts inevitably muddy the waters, leaving justice elusive? The victim, a child whose life was cut short, deserves a resolution that transcends personal agendas. This tragedy urges us to demand accountability, not just from those involved but from the systems that investigate and report such cases, ensuring that the quest for truth remains untainted by motives that obscure rather than illuminate. The hope for justice persists, driven by the belief that even after decades, the truth can still be uncovered, honoring the memory of a life lost too soon.